And so you can kind of say, okay, yeah, this is working really well. And no one seems to realize that this might be a $1 trillion business. Hey there, welcome to Book Overflow, the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I'm Carter Morgan, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toups. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, wherever you are, thanks for listening, and like, comment, subscribe on whatever platform you're on, leave a 5-star review, and share with your fans and coworkers, and in particular, share it on LinkedIn. Sometimes people share the podcast on LinkedIn, and they tag us even, and we try to jump in there and express our appreciation. So by all means, if you want to do that, that helps the podcast. And we are excited this week about the book. Like we've talked about on this podcast before, just trying to find the right balance between career-focused stuff, maybe more technical stuff. We're branching out a bit this week with a different kind of book. I really like these kinds of books. They're kind of like journalistic, because this one is called In The Plex by Steven Levy. And it's all about Google and its rise and how it became a company, and just kind of, I don't know. That's what it is. It's about its rise. Let me just read it. So first, let's talk about Steven Levy. Steven Levy is one of technology journalism's most respected voices, having chronicled the digital revolution for over 3 decades as a senior writer for Newsweek and later Wired magazine. Known for his unprecedented access to text inner circles and his ability to translate complex technical concepts into compelling narratives, Levy previously authored the seminal book Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, and has covered Google since its earliest days in 1999, making him uniquely qualified to tell the company's inside story. And this book, In The Plex, offers an unprecedented inside look at Google from its origins as a Stanford research project through its evolution into one of the world's most powerful companies, based on Levy's extensive access to the company's founders, employees, and internal meetings over several years. The book reveals how Larry Page and Sergey Brin's breakthrough PageRank algorithm revolutionized internet search, how Google's unique culture and data-driven approach to innovation shapes products that billions use daily, and how the company's meteoric rise created new challenges around privacy, corporate power, and the very nature of human knowledge in the digital age. Yeah, I mean, so that summarizes it. This is just one of those kind of, I don't know what this genre is called. I think I asked ChatGPT and it's called like journalistic or something. But yeah, I really like these kinds of books where like a journalist who has covered this topic for lots of years sits down and writes like an in-depth book on it. I've done The Upstarts and The Everything Store by Brad Stone. This one's been really good. And then in a very different vein, The War for Late Night, which was all about when Conan O'Brien got the Tonight Show and then lost it within like 7 months, and his kind of feud with Jay Leno. That was done by the New York Times late night reporter, and is excellent. I love that book. So this book, yeah, I've really been enjoying this book. I mean, Nathan, I guess, why don't you give your general thoughts first?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Steven Levy. The first Steven Levy book I'd read a lot of his like Wired and Newsweek type articles. Knew of him. But he has another book. We should probably put this on the backlog as well. It's called Crypto. It's about the history of Diffie-Hellman and RSA, and a very sort of unlikely mix of like all the weird cyberpunks. I mean, like cypherpunk stuff that was happening back in the 80s and 90s that kind of made encryption a form of free speech, which might not have gone that direction. And of course, in the like very Steven Levy way, these real people become this cast of characters, and he's a very good storyteller, and yet it's based on reality, right? These are real events that are taking place, and it's really cool to see his writing style now that I'm seeing from this cypherpunk crypto thing, which is an area I love, to also see this overlaid into Google, where I knew lots of bits and pieces. I knew of the major characters. It's funny, I actually didn't know things like Marissa Mayer and the woman who ended up being at Facebook or Meta. There's several people prolific.
Sarah. No, I know who you're talking. How do I not remember her name?
It's
Sheryl Sandberg.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah.
I didn't realize both of them had spent time at Google before they went to be like, prolific leaders in other areas. So this was kind
Yeah,
of
Marissa Mayer pops up, and I was just
yeah.
like, I'm like Yahoo, Marissa Mayer,
Yeah, yeah, and
and
she was a
yeah,
former VP of engineering at Google and stuff.
mhm.
So there's a lot of that sort of inside baseball that I didn't know about. And there's also sort of it's interesting that they're in many ways the sort of prototype of what these Silicon Valley unicorns all aspire to be.
Mhm.
And yet these folks are the real deal, you know. And I don't know, I have a conflicted feelings about Google, and yet I also deeply respect the fact that they were able to deliver on their vision, even if I think some of their vision is terrifying. So I'm sure we'll
Yeah,
get into that.
and the book doesn't shy away from that. It kind of opens
Yeah.
up. One of the ways it opens up is a big lawsuit between a lot of the different publishing organizations in America versus Google because of Google's project to index every single book. And so this definitely isn't like a super rosy picture of everything Google's done. Google is a controversial company. But I always love, I do find with these books. So we did parts 1 and 2 this week. It's a 5-part book.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how it'll go, just because I find with myself that in all of these kind of like again, like I love these journalism books about especially the rise of any company. I love the first part, like how the company got started, how it gets off the ground, and then I do lose a bit of interest as it goes on. Some books hold your attention really well throughout the whole thing. The Everything Store by Brad Stone really is such a fantastic book. So I'm curious how this will go, but I mean, I loved this first part. I am I think it's interesting to see kind of the winding path Google takes at the beginning. I think it's funny, like I'm so jealous of people who have ideas for businesses that are just kind of like so simple and so like, of course the world needs that. And Google is one of those things, right? Where it's like, of course the world needed a real deal search engine that actually worked. Like it doesn't start out that way. We'll talk about it as it goes on. And these weren't Sergey and Larry did not set out to, okay, how are we going to build a $1 trillion company? And I think you see that with like a lot of startup founders, especially like in the internet age, where like there's so many people who say, I want to start a company, and then they work backwards from that, and they'll just find any idea they have that they think is company worthy. It didn't happen with Larry and Sergey. They were academics, and once they had a good enough idea, they kind of realized like, oh wait, this could only really work as a company. So very interesting to see how it starts, and some of the interesting steps along the way. We're going to talk about all of that and more right after the break. And we are back. Okay, well, let's just start right at the beginning with Larry and Sergey. I mean, if you read the book, you get a lot of nice biographical information about their families and where they came from. I mean, we're not going to give you all of that, but we can talk about what I thought was interesting is that they were PhD students at Stanford. They had come to Stanford. I believe both their fathers had PhDs, but they were pretty set on doing the academic thing.
Right.
And just as they were kind of finding what problem, like what they wanted to do for a thesis, they kind of stumble into this idea of indexing the internet, because what they had realized, and I thought this was neat, and I'm always a fan of when kind of ideas in one domain form an idea in another domain, which is coming from academic backgrounds. They had recognized that in academia, you can tell which papers are more important than others by how often they're referenced. You don't even need to read the paper. You can just count how many times it's referenced by other papers. Um, and the problem with early internet search engines like Alta Vista is that basically what they did is they just kind of took snapshots of the entire web, and then it was basically like a string matching mechanism. They kind of talk about early Alta Vista, one of the problems being that like if you Googled Bill Clinton, or not Google, I guess if you Alta Vista Bill Clinton, you wouldn't get whitehouse.gov, you would get Bill Clinton joke of the day website. So
Mm-hmm.
when they're thinking about, okay, well, what do we so maybe the internet works like a research paper. Maybe you can tell what the most important result on the internet is by how often it's linked to and how many people are pointing to it. But the problem with hyperlinks on the internet is that you can't follow them backwards. You can't just go to a website and say, okay, well, or you can't go to a website and say, give me everything that's ever linked to me. You have to crawl the entire web and index it. And so that kind of became their research project at Stanford was, could we crawl the entire web, index it, find all the links that are pointing in, and then run some kind of very mathematical calculations on it, which the book doesn't go into too much detail, and rank them. And that became PageRank, which is kind of the legendary Google algorithm. And so I don't know, Nathan, what do you think about all this? That, it kind of starts as a research project.
There's a couple interesting things here, which is that they also have very much the hacker ethos, in that they would ask forgiveness and not permission. So originally, when they were like, "Oh, well, how much of the internet do you want to index?" and I think it was Larry Page was like, "All of it," right? And it was a presumptuous thing to an outsider, but both of them, both Sergey and Larry, were very out of the box thinkers. Actually, I think Sergey always thought of himself as a product person, actually, even though they're engineers at the end of the day. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is when they were indexing stuff in their dorm room, they realized that the IT folks had misconfigured a router. And that if they did a hard reboot on it and a couple of other things, they could actually get the full bandwidth of the campus into the dorm room, which was at the time was like a T3 line. So it was like 4.5 megabits or something. It was not like a crazy amount of bandwidth, but it was 4 times the amount that it was allocated to that dorm. And so it was that kind of obviously they're breaking the rules. Obviously they're doing stuff that they're not supposed to. At the same time, their goals were so large that they got real scrappy and did some amazing things. I think the other one was the beauty of mathematics, right? They understood these very abstract ideas of the relationship between data points as it's expressed in some sort of linear algebra or, some other really beautiful descriptions, and that they could overcome all of these hardships that everybody had assumed up to this point, we need to manually tag and index things, or we have to tell the system that Bill Clinton is associated with the White House so that when these things are in place. And of course, the genius of PageRank is that these other things are emergent properties. That there's an association between the White House and Bill Clinton because a bunch of news articles inside of whitehouse.gov or whatever, maybe it doesn't have this strong correlation, but news articles that talk about Bill Clinton that maybe will link back to the whitehouse.gov and we'll talk about Bill Clinton will give this tight association. And these things sort of emerge out of the algorithms. And this sort of incredible focus on how do I express this algorithmically is what allowed Google to run circles around everyone. You see this as they grow, as they figure out how to become profitable later with AdSense and all these other things. None of that part changes, right? They're there's got to be an algorithmic way. How do we do this without having to personally moderate data? How do we do this without having to do these other things? And I don't know. I think one of the things that struck me was that solving interesting problems in play was this spectrum. Engineers are on this 2-tiered system where somebody who's solving interesting sales or something problems were literally on a lower rung than can I get an engineer to think about this type of problem, because that's what Sergey and Larry came from. And they sort of reluctantly got into solving business problems, but they also realized hey, people are asking the wrong questions. Maybe we can approach these business problems as an engineer. And as presumptuous as and insane that was, obviously their model of the universe was effective because they're one of the most valuable companies on the planet now.
I thought it was interesting too that by their own admission, the initial web crawling code was not very good. I know that because who wrote? I think Sergey.
They both wrote some of it, and they started in Java when Java was too immature at the time. At least that's what the book was saying, and so they switched over to Python because it was more expressive. And I think a lot of the mathematical stuff that they wanted to do was Python was basically a physics and mathematics research language, right, back in the 90s. But of course, that helped them become very productive. So early Google code was all Python, actually.
Yeah, I thought that was Python's one of those funny languages that you feel like it's much newer than it is, but it actually predates Java. And so I thought that was just funny with the Google origin story that Java's too new, too flashy. we'll use Python instead.
Right.
And yeah, like I think because they get like a buddy of theirs to kind of come in and help them with the code. And I can't remember. At one point, I do know that they rewrite the entire thing. I can't remember if that's at the beginning and or who made the decision to switch to Python. But at any rate, I think that's interesting about some of these kind of legendary internet founders, like your like Larry and Sergey or Zuckerberg. I saw a Reddit discussion, someone asking like, okay, so how good a programmer was Zuckerberg really? And the answer is kind of, people were saying like, I don't know, like he dropped out when he was a freshman. Like how good can you really get by then? And what the original Facebook wasn't anything so crazy that no one else could have built it. I mean, at the end of the day, it was basically a CRUD application.
I will say though that like I don't think that I mean, it's my hot take. Universities don't make good programmers. And they actually talk about this, right? They talk about this like university code, academically consistent, maybe even has some philosophical pieces that are really interesting. But just going out and building stuff is actually going to make you a much better programmer. And so I would say with Zuckerberg, without even seeing his code, he was good enough, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
And I think it's in the same way that like when we say like Larry Page or Sergey Brin were not good programmers, it's in the same way that we would say that like Einstein wasn't good at mathematics. He actually was amazing, but he was not the best of the best. And so Einstein knew, hey, I have this great idea of like how gravity, distorts space-time, but I'm hitting some edges. And so he would go find the most prolific mathematician to help him finish the math. I think this is the same boat where like Larry and Sergey are like probably better than 99% of programmers on the planet. But to get to that where they can 100x scale some code, they need the who's who of Stanford to come in and like really build this with, leak code style, big O notation, optimizations and things like that. So I think they're humble about their abilities. I think you or I would probably be like, oh man, if I could program as good as Larry Page, I would be very happy in life.
Okay, so here's what I then think is funny about all of this. So they have this, it's working well, and I like any sort of product where you can kind of tell it's working well just by like an eye test, and that's what they're doing. They're basically just Googling things. It wasn't called Google at the time, but
right.
And looking at the search results and going, does this seem relevant? And especially comparing it to Alta Vista. And again, that Bill Clinton search is a great example. Like, yeah, we're showing whitehouse.gov, they're showing Bill Clinton joke of the day. And so you can kind of say, okay, yeah, this is working really well. And no one seems to realize that this might be $1 trillion business. And I think it's funny. You'll hear about that happening a lot through a lot of, with a lot of great companies. Sometimes it makes more sense than others. Like I know the Airbnb guys were viewed as like insane. Like they pitched to so many people. And I get why people thought they were insane. It's like, so you want strangers to agree to rent out their home to strangers. And you think those strangers on the internet are going to be okay showing up to someone's home and sleeping there? Like, it's an absolutely insane idea if you think about it for more than 10 seconds.
When they started that, they weren't even talking about renting out an entire home. I think that wasn't even...
Yeah, it was just like a couch.
Like rent a couch out, which is funny because there was I used to use a service called couchsurfing.com.
Oh, yeah. That was like the original one.
Yeah, and so it was free and like egalitarian, and you built up a reputation. And I used, actually, in my early 20s, I used that a lot, actually. And
nice.
So I was like, wait, there's a paid for version of this? Like, how is this to make any sense? Of course, I was way wrong. But
yeah. And like, and they initially saw the Airbnb guys as a little more like community driven. Like they never saw kind of the future we have today where like people buy properties to have exclusively as Airbnbs. It was kind of like you were supposed to have the personal touch of staying with the host. Right. But anyhow, I get why investors were like, what on earth are you talking about? But Google, they have something that's very clearly working well. And they pitch it to a lot of different people. They pitch it to like Yahoo. They pitch it to an early search engine, Excite, to kind of like handle their search. They straight up try to sell the technology. They pitch it to investors. Right. It's not working. No one's really biting. And then they're kind of still like, well, I guess maybe it's just a research project. Maybe we'll just, stay here at Stanford, finish out our PhDs. Even, I think they get really close to selling it to a company. I can't remember which one, but I think Larry has it's stipulated that he'll work there for 7 months, and then because then after that 7 months, he can leave, go back to Stanford, and get his PhD.
Right.
So yeah, like no one seems to realize that this might be like the most important invention on the internet of all time.
And there's a few things too that were like they're presumptuous at the time. One was everyone thought that these data query systems were just very hardware intensive from the big hardware manufacturers, and that obviously this would have to come out of some major hardware, IBM, the remnants of DEC. There's a few other companies they even mention in here. The other one was that there was no business model, and you have to remember that
That's true.
The market crashed in 2000, and everyone was really spooked. And Google, of course, got, I guess I think they got some of their funding right before all of this
I think
happened.
so.
But they didn't have a business model. Like they basically were like, oh, we have this amazing technology, but they kind of hand wavy said, oh, we will make it ad supported or something, but they didn't know what that meant. There wasn't even a good way of doing ads at the time. At the time, people did banner ads and they were super obnoxious. Well, again, banner ads are back, like super strong. But that was the only type of advertising that was really there. Was these banner ads were really all over the place. They weren't very effective. You were very manual. You had to like cut a deal, with the salesperson. And so that was really interesting. I really appreciated it. And again, it's taken for granted now, but they had this like insatiable need for data. And there was like one little story in here where it was either Sergey or Larry had like cut a deal with some hard drive maker that had a bunch of like hard drives that had like manufacturing defects, but they could get it at 1/10 of the price.
Yeah.
But they realized they just have to do like write some code to fix.
They just had to replace the operating system on it. Like the hardware was fine, but there was some bug with the operating system.
So they ended up writing. So Google is famous for this. They ended up writing something. These like distributed file systems, and they always built all their stuff on commodity hardware that was not very reliable, but they would write code so that it could like self-heal and it could recover from this stuff. And so instead of having to buy big finished out data centers from these big hardware manufacturers, they would just buy commodity stuff and stack and rack it and just build it out as they went. And again, this is the same sort of like question everything methodology that both of them came from, which is that they would ask a question, they would see what the answers were from the public, and then go, should that be the answer? Is that a real constraint? Like, do we really? Which is so presumptuous, right? Like that is absolutely ridiculous. Most people have no ability to actually correctly discern whether they really should go off and do their own thing. But Google, time and time again, came in and sort of like reimagined how we do software deploys and how does code get committed and how do we do hard disk storage and all these other things that are, you look at it and you go, what planet are these guys from?
Yeah.
This is so weird, interesting.
Well, and I admire, at least early Google here. I think there's a great impulse in a lot of great founders, but also just engineers or anyone kind of product minded, where you really relentlessly focus on, okay, what is the customer or the user like? What would be the best experience for them? And then, and let's drive towards that, and we'll monetize in other ways. Just kind of like as an example, in this book, they try to sell it to Excite, which is like an early search engine. But the Excite CEO, and this was kind of back in the day when like they wouldn't let the engineers remain as CEOs. They'd bring in like what they call adult supervision. And so they kind of have like kind of old school CEOs. But the CEO is like, hey, this technology is too good. Like they're not staying on your website long enough. And so how am I supposed to monetize this? And I think there are some good products that get killed by that sort of thinking, because Larry and Sergey kind of realized correctly, like, no, like speed's the name of the game. We want to make our customers happy. If we make our customers happy, they keep coming back to Google. And then, and obviously that's worked out very, very well for them. Jeff Bezos, very controversial figure, but he was relentless about that at Amazon at the beginning. Just for example, like when they did customer reviews, and they like that was very controversial. They were kind of like, what do you mean you're going to let people put negative reviews of the books right on our website? And he's kind of like, yeah, like, isn't that the information the customer wants? And so
Right.
time and time again, Jeff Bezos makes decisions where they're not the best monetization decisions, but they are the best decisions for the customer. And he kind of sensed that if he could get customers to have a really strong positive association with the Amazon brand, that they might lose a bit here and there, but overall it would be much better for the product. I often wonder what he thinks about the fact that there's all those ads on Amazon pages now, because I freaking hate those things. Like, I know it's very, very profitable for them, but it's a terrible customer experience. I want to know what the best product is, not what the most sponsored product is.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting, and it is interesting too when like you have a core philosophy, but you can lose your way, and just because of how things work. I think the same thing is that we're in an interesting juxtaposition right now. I think it was the All In podcast had a live event, and Sergey was on it recently. Maybe maybe we can link to it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But Sergey kind of freaked out the folks at Google because he's actually started committing code again. So he was telling this kind of cool story, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but he was saying that he was like, "Oh, I'm going to step back and go do some other stuff." And he's like, "I was bored, like I didn't know what to do." And he's like having lunch with a friend, and they were like, "We're in an AI revolution right now, and this is like your baby. Go build stuff at your company." And so he's been going, but he's also been looking at the developer experience, and like he tried to get a new environment set up, but he ran into some problems. And so he was like fixing the like onboarding experience because he needed to like, do some AI model stuff. And so people of course were a little freaked out. And then somebody like forbid him from doing something, some like gatekeeping thing. And they were actually talking about what a healthy company that is, where like a founding, the founder could come in and try to do something, and they make sure that the way that you write code or the way that you're committing stuff is safe for the institution, no matter who you were. Like you just couldn't come in and, do a force push or something somewhere just because of who you were. It's a really interesting story. And again, it makes even more sense now that I've been reading this book, because you're like, this is an engineer's company, right? This is a company in which even now he can go in with curiosity and explore stuff. And of course, he's got a perspective on AI and ML that younger folks who are straight out of college didn't understand, right? Like there may be some, and I think there's these multimodal models and all these other kind of cool things. And if you look at this, right, OpenAI comes in, and Google's in this interesting spot where they're the establishment now. OpenAI comes in, people realize, hey, I actually like the quote unquote search experience better in this chat interface for certain types of questions that I want to ask. And they've noticed that they've stopped going to Google, right? If I'm looking at protocol stuff, or if I want to understand how the interface of something or some pattern works, I actually will reach for a chat tool over Googling it, right? At this point. And so Google has to figure out, okay, well, how do we take that familiar interface, but use our amazing indexing the way that, because there's still faster queries. It takes a while for the chat prompts to respond to things. And then how do I do a chat interface that also has ads embedded in a way that helps us make money and pay for stuff, right? Because OpenAI, for instance, there's burning boatloads of money, right? There's no business model yet for them. There's no path to profitability currently. But Google,
I've heard that like the premium membership should probably be like $100 a month if they actually wanted it to be profitable, or it's like or it's $20.
I think they're still losing money on the one that's like $2,000 a month or whatever.
Really,
right?
really.
Oh yeah. It's interesting. But I just recently upgraded to. I've been a happy Claude user for probably about 3 or 4 months now, and I just upgraded to Max, which is the one that's like $100 a month.
Oh wow.
Which it seems absurd, but there's a certain types of problems that I'm working on that it actually luckily it's month to month. If I'm not getting the value out of it, I'll stop using it.
Yeah.
But I've started using it for certain types of problems enough that I'm like getting enough value out of it that I was like, oh, this is justifiable. But yeah, I think that one of the things I wanted to bring up from this book that I thought was really interesting was that they call it the Tesla complex. And
Oh
I'd love to
yeah,
get your thoughts
yeah.
on this too. So this is like a little like, you know, monkey on Larry Page's back,
Uh-huh.
where he's has this huge appreciation for Tesla. And it's funny because I think in the early
Nikola
2000s,
Tesla, not
Nikola
the
Tesla,
car
thank you. Yeah,
company,
not the car
which
company. So yeah, car company didn't even exist back then. So Nikolai
I'll just point
Tesla,
out Tesla is kind of funny, and it's almost like an Alexander Hamilton effect, where like
yep.
Tesla was named after Tesla, almost like give him this recognition, but now Tesla is such like a big name. Like
Yeah.
Hamilton's kind of the same way. Like I have to explain to my kids, like, no one knew who Alexander Hamilton was when I was a kid.
Yes. And
Like,
so in 1999, he was an obscure, unknown thing, right?
absolutely.
It was the inner workings of geek culture. In the same way that I think that Claude Shannon is probably someone who everyone should know his name, but most people don't. But Tesla was, you know, he kind of died in obscurity. He ended up having these prolific, amazing ideas, but never had a platform for it. And I think Larry Page even like wonders like if Tesla had existed in this modern world of venture capital, he probably would have been a very
Yeah.
successful tech founder, right?
Basically, kind of always overshadowed by Thomas Edison, because Thomas Edison, he had more business acumen, maybe better at marketing, maybe a little more unethical in other parts, but kind of,
Right.
yeah, Tesla's contributions were forgotten by the world, especially in the 90s.
So he's always like, I don't want this to happen to me. I don't want this to be my fate. And I think this is such a, a core intent. Like you can see that Larry Page goes, I have to reconcile this into autonomy, right? I have to, yes, I have these outlandish and wild ideas, but I don't want to die in obscurity. I want to be empowered to be able to do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see where this is what powers Google, right?
Yeah.
And again, this also, I would also call this the spooky side, right? Because imagine what Google's really doing at the end of the day. And they talk about this in the book. They basically have to create a copy of the internet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to crawl every page and extract all of the backlinks and do all of the indexing and do all these things, you literally have to have a snapshot of the entire internet, right? Even if you don't store every byte of the internet, you store every byte that you're interested in. And of course, Google is interested in more and more and more stuff. That's absurd, right? That is the most presumptuous thing that Google basically has a shadow copy of the internet and then makes it so that you can query any idea from it in a fraction of a second. That's completely insane.
Yeah, I thought this whole Tesla complex was really interesting too. I have not a Tesla complex, but I do. We talked about it with rework last week. That making your dent in the universe idea really resonates with me. I don't want to. I don't want to be forgotten. There's something nice. To get more personal. There's something really nice, folks, about having a wife or a spouse, I guess, whoever you are, and kids, because you can. I think there are a lot of people that kind of worry and be like, do I really matter? And like that's something that's nice about having kids, especially, is you kind of think like, hey, at the very least, I matter to these guys, right? And so that, like, because I really don't want to live a life where it ends and people are like, who's that guy again? So I'm like, okay, at the very least, like that won't happen with my kids. Like I'm important to my kids, but I do want to, I don't know, career wise, I have larger ambitions than just, getting a standard 9 to 5 and kind of doing that for the rest of my days. So I thought it was interesting, this kind of Tesla version of that, where Larry wasn't so much concerned like, will I be able to do something great? He was more like, well, I think I'm an inventive guy. I think I've got a bright mind. Will I be able to turn those ideas into something that people remember? And kind of, using Tesla as this kind of warning for what could be. Yeah, really, I think the psychology of those founders is very fascinating. Well, and I also think one thing I thought was fascinating with kind of early Google is like it's overrated. Like you want to have a business idea where the incentives all line up, and I think sometimes people like execution is one thing, but getting kind of the core idea right is a really important thing too. And that's what Google had going for them that like Alta Vista didn't. Like Alta Vista's problem was, as the web continued to grow, like that was just a problem for AltaVista because all they were doing is basically just making a copy of the web and then doing string matching. So like as the web gets bigger, it's just a big cost for AltaVista. It doesn't improve their product anyway. Total opposite for Google because PageRank is basically just, the democratization of information on the internet, just taking what the people say and using that to determine what's the most important thing. And so as the internet continues to grow, Google only gets better. And like, yeah, you see a lot of like scary privacy implications with that today because Google has realized that kind of since the very beginning, like, oh, data is what powers us. Data is our gold mine. But I think that was very clever for them to come up with a system that would only get better as the internet grew, whereas all of their rivals kind of struggle with that.
Yeah. I also thought it was interesting. There's a really good overlap with hypermedia systems because the same folks who pioneered the idea of a hyperlink, the idea of a web in which all referenceable data could be cross-referenced across all data that's available and easily consumable. The missing piece here was this ability to index, right? As the data grew, especially as it grew exponentially, there was no easy discovery mechanism. It's interesting. We had some experiments internally. We were looking at kind of like the early indie web, and there were these things called web rings, and I wasn't really familiar with them actually. I knew that they kind of existed, but I didn't know the term. Are you familiar with web rings?
I'm not, no.
Yeah. So a web ring was literally a community of folks you would basically like if you had a website, and maybe it was like a GeoCities website or something, right? And it's like old back in the day before Facebook, before MySpace, before all this other stuff. You could have like a little page, a web page. You could join a web ring, and so maybe there's like 20 of you, and maybe it was a web ring on people who wrote Perl scripts or something, right? But you would put a little banner at the bottom or the top of your page, and it would have a previous and a next button. And so you could discover other people in the web ring just by hitting the next button, and it was a ring. So it would loop back to the beginning. And so you could discover people's content, and it was sort of vetted by group. And of course it used hyperlinks, it uses this idea, but it was also, curated a little community thing. Those largely disappeared once indexing of the whole internet, came out and relevance came up. Then you could just discover things that you couldn't even imagine. But these I still like this sort of like indie web idea of like a curated web ring, because you're like, hey, you know what? The 20 of us or 100 of us or whatever really respect each other. We create content in this type of method, and we have these community values, and like you can discover any of us because any one of us will link back to the other. So I thought that was kind of a fun thing.
Yeah.
Ethical considerations.
Let's talk about the ethics. I think just one thing before moving on to ethics, because we can probably close out with ethics, is I always think a lot of books like this that focus kind of on companies have dedicated chapter or a section to like the non-starters, like because it's very rare that someone has an idea that no one else had. Yeah. That's how I know about couchsurfing.com. It was in the Airbnb book. They had a whole section on couchsurfing and how it kind of failed to take off. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Like they mentioned, there's a couple people. I think one is from DEC, one is from IBM, who have this idea to rank the internet based on hypertext links or hyperlinks, and like IBM looks at it and is like, what do we do with this?
Right.
Like, and then I think it's funny, just like history repeats itself. Like this happened at Google recently, where they invented the large language model transformer. Like in 2015, they have a research paper on it. And Google kind of takes a look at it and says like, so what are we supposed to do with this? And, whether or not that was kind of willful blindness, kind of like that famous Kodak killing the digital camera story, or I think it's just more that when you kind of get your blinders on, you kind of look at all the things that are working out very, very well for you. And you say like, it's not, I don't know if they looked at this and said, oh my gosh, this would kill search, so we can't do it. I think they just more said like, I don't know, why would anyone need something like this? We have search. And yeah, I just think like Google very much benefited from that dynamic when they were young and scrappy. And I think a lot of tech companies try really, really hard to not let that happen again. But I mean, Google had the chance to kind of strangle OpenAI in the cradle, and they didn't take it. And now they've got someone that's really serving as a real threat to them, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I thought I kind of transformed my thinking on this. I thought that Google was doomed. I thought they were going to be in an IBM situation where they're going to be around, but they're going to become more and more irrelevant. I've been really surprised over the last like maybe 8 or 9 months where Google, it really put a fire under them. And I think that what they're doing with Gemini and the fact that they actually have like, they're positioned incredibly well, where, you know, the greatest competitor to Apple in the hardware space for mobile devices is Google, that they already have a good reputation from a personal assistant standpoint. And that now that they're adding more and more of the Gemini large language model chatbot technology, they already have the trust relationship there, right? I think they're building the larger and larger moat. Siri and Siri and Alexa are kind of these vestiges of the past at this point,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
Siri, Apple.
You don't like Siri? No.
Yeah.
You don't like
it's true.
Siri.
We keep Siri. It's either Siri or that one bad startup you worked for. Yeah. We always have to bring it up. But yeah, so like, but it's interesting because, you know, we see the missed opportunity. We see the fact that it's not in their DNA at Apple to build this user first sort of AI tool, at least. And right now they're in the vaporware space, right? Where they came out earlier this year and promised a bunch of things, and they keep delaying the features that people really want. Google has not done that. They got scared from OpenAI, and now they're now giving OpenAI a run for their money. And the only difference being is that Google's got deep, profitable coffers, where OpenAI is going to have to continue to beg money. And unlike their charter, OpenAI started as, oh, we need an open way of doing this. You know, we can't trust private companies from doing this. And of course, every time that they try to get more power, they're becoming more and more private. They're not open. You know, they're actually not their name at all. And so I don't think you can out Google, right? I think OpenAI could innovate in some way that's just fundamentally different. That's entirely possible. And I think it was who was it? Charlie Munger, who was the business partner of Warren Buffett. He was like talking about why he wouldn't invest in Tesla, and he's like, I don't understand the business. I don't understand the multiples. He's like, but I also won't bet against Elon Musk. Like, he's like, I don't think that's a good idea either. I think that's the same with Sam Altman. I don't trust Sam Altman. Like, he gives me the creeps. I'll be completely honest. But I also think that he's incredibly capable at reshaping the world in his vision. And those kind of people are super rare. And you don't know. He might be incredibly successful. The other things he's working on, like WorldCoin, you know, I'm in the crypto space. WorldCoin is a nightmare scenario. I think that it's like literally the scariest thing.
What is WorldCoin?
Oh man, it's a retinal scan tool where they prove your identity, but then because of this, you basically can, you know, interact with traditional commerce, but it's all blockchain based. And so it's the most dystopian thing you can imagine, because you have like a retinal scan backing of like all transactions.
I saw Minority Report.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no way that a government could abuse this power. Right? You know, we just have to work with the good governments, right? I mean, so, and so, yeah, but at the same time, you know, his vision may win out. I'm sitting here watching this stuff and thinking, are there other ways we could architect digital sovereignty and these other things that aren't WorldCoin? But at the same time, he's so capable at moving very fast. And I think that like large language models, you know, public ledgers, however you want to think about those tools, these things are going to reshape the world. And if we don't participate in how we shape society and how we do these things, a few really capable and huge thinkers are just going to do it for us. And I think this gets us into the morality and ethics piece, which is that while we have these amazing technologies, I think these folks are moving so fast that it's hard for us to wrap our heads around it. And we see this with government policy, right? We don't even know how to regulate the tech companies. We don't know.
Mhm.
Are they too big to fail? There's a big debate happening right now where like Google is most likely going to be forced to sell off Chrome
Oh yeah,
browser.
yeah.
Um, I think that's a good and healthy thing. I think that we actually do need to think about like, are you in too many businesses so that it's actually harmful to the end user at the end of the day? But how do we do this in a way that's also like useful for businesses to operate in so that they don't try to go down this path again? How do they say, you know what, I can make a very good living here, but if I'm in this space, I can't also be in this space, right? That,
Yeah, it
that's
is
all problems.
fascinating. I mean, I'm generally I'm generally a fairly low regulation, pro business kind of guy. But I think I don't know. I like, especially with the rapid advances in AI, and that's kind of been the Silicon Valley's motto for a long time, is like innovate faster than they can regulate. Um, that that's worked out really well in some places. Like Uber, I think, is an interesting example where a lot of people attempted to build Uber prior to Uber, but the mistake they all made was, we're going to work with the cab companies, or we're going to work with the local government. Uber kind of took a very reckless approach where they were just like, no, like we're just going to like kind of go to war with the cab companies, and in some ways go to war with the local government. And the calculation they made that wound up being correct was that their service would be so superior to the existing offerings that the public would go to bat for them. So that by the time they were in a city and it was working and people were using Uber, and the government would try to come along and say, hey, well, you can't do this. The people would cry out and be like, what are you talking about? This is so much better than the previous cab systems. But like, I get it. Like, I think there was a ton that was wrong with the old cab systems, but I also know that like individual drivers or companies would invest lots of money in these taxi medallions, which would give you the right to
Oh
operate a
yeah.
cab. And so
Mhm.
now all of a sudden, like, you buy that because you think it's like, your exclusive right, and will have guarantee a steady source of income. And then all of a sudden, these guys that aren't playing by the rules show up. Like, do I think the previous rules are wrong and broken? Yeah. Do I feel bad for the people who were operating by those rules in good faith and got screwed? Of course. And yeah, like I just think it it's so interesting because at their heart, like, I do think like these, like they kind of mentioned at the lawsuit at the beginning with Google versus all the publishers, and the publishers are all very mad, and Google is kind of confused. They're like, what are you talking about? This is the democratization of the internet. This is making information free and available. Like, how could you be against this? And it's kind of like, yeah, that's good in theory. It's also mighty convenient that you personally get insanely rich with
Right.
the democratization of information. I feel it.
It
I think. Oh,
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think ChatGPT has been, and large language models have been a huge gift to humanity in a lot of ways. I also feel really bad for the people art whose art was used to train it. Like, how can you not feel like, wait a minute, like, you stole from me? Like, I
Right.
didn't think you were going to use it that way.
Yeah, this is also, it's also fascinating because it reminds me, and again, I guess maybe this is the third tier thing. I always inevitably end up bringing up Edward Snowden. Um, Edward Snowden, when he had his leaks that came out, was talking about the government would come in and be like, "Oh, well, we're not capturing your data, it's the metadata. Like, we're just capturing
Sure.
the metadata." And Snowden and other folks that are privacy advocates were like, "That's the only part that's actually interesting, right? The metadata is actually much, like what you privately messaged between your spouse about getting the cat food to the cat or whatever is way less interesting than the fact that like I have your geolocation data. I know how frequently you talk to your spouse. So like maybe if there's a change in the rate of numbers of messages that you have with your spouse, maybe I can identify spousal problems or other things, right? There's a lot of stories that you can tell without understanding the content. Um, the same applies to Google, right? Google has an incredible metadata machine. They want to down to the keystroke, right? They even talked about this. Can we preempt? And I remember when this feature came out with Google, they would preempt the rest of the message I was going to type in, right? So I start typing something in, and then there's like the suggested,
Yeah, yeah.
the 5 top suggested. That when that technology came out, that was mind-boggling, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because it gave you a glimpse of like it wasn't just other people who were doing searches, but it's people who they thought you were similar to who were doing those searches, right? Like there's all these like really kind of wild ideas. As a private company who's just trying to serve a customer, that, and I'm choosing to use Google, and Google's choosing to give me this data back. But in a world after 9/11, where there's these things called national security letters, where the government can compel a private corporation to turn over data and disallow the corporation from telling you that the government has requested this. Well, now the government's not capturing the data, but they can compel private companies to give them all the interesting metadata that they want. Now we get into this weird thing. You're like, okay, well, maybe I trust the United States and they're, going after the bad guys. Well, what if you live in Saudi Arabia? What if you live in China? What if you live in other places in which your group might be adversarial minority? There's a minority and there's an adversarial relationship between this. Does Google just turn over the data because they want to continue to make ad revenue in those countries? Or do they take a stand and stop? And what policies do the government of our country have? Do we allow them to trade with people who, maybe cross certain boundaries? These are messy, weird things that literally, it was a question you couldn't ask, right? When there wasn't a private corporation doing ad revenue and trying to predict what you want to do next, that is a Pandora's box for government, right? And again, a healthy, functional democracy is not what I'm worried about. But we say, how easy is it in a single election to go to fascism? Well, we have evidence of this in Germany, right? We have evidence of this. Things can go sideways, and all of a sudden, the tools to get the bad guys get turned inwards, right? And all of a sudden, the enemy's within, and the government's paranoid about being overthrown, or all kinds of weird things that you have to think about in these infinities. The same way that Larry Page and Sergey Brin think about the world, other innovative thinkers in verticals that we may not think of as innovative, could come into a government and say, hey, I'm going to have a relationship with these private corporations. I'll make sure that they don't get regulated, but then they're going to give me the data so that I can look for my political adversaries. And it's not unreasonable to think that something like this could happen. And so I think at least we need to ask these questions and make sure that we have rules in place so that if things start going a weird direction, we have a way to communicate about it, and it isn't just like disappeared off the internet, weird stuff like that.
I know, and stay tuned for next week when we'll have the definitive and correct answers to all these questions.
Yes, of course. Oh man.
No, I mean,
oh man.
You're right, but it's tricky because at the same time, Google has brought a lot of wealth, not just to its founders, but also they employ lots of people. I mean, Google has made lots of run-of-the-mill engineers very wealthy, right? They've, they have been a huge boon to small businesses with effective advertising. I mean, I think we all benefit from its search tools, and so, this all just gets so sticky because, every point you've brought up is totally valid about what if this all goes sideways, but we've all kind of been willing to look the other way because we've said but it's doing all these great things for us, and of course all those bad things won't happen. But yeah, I wonder, we've built such a house of cards, or I don't know if house of cards is the right move, but heaven forbid we see another world war, or heaven forbid a civil war or something in our country. But I have no idea what we look like on the other side of that, because I think so much of the tooling we've built operates off that kind of lowercase l liberal post World War II order. And the moment that changes and we have to, and the paradigm shifts, a lot of these things we've built, I don't know, maybe they don't exist in 20 or 30 years if heaven forbid a political conflict like that happens.
And it also is entirely possible that we get into I'm loving where we're just going completely left field here. We could get into this sort of Brave New World scenario in which we just sort of entertain ourselves to death. And I think that's very likely thing. At least maybe there's a subset of the population who very stoically can resist all of these things. But most of the population, I think, are going to probably become gambling addicts, get addicted to drugs, and maybe even not pill forms, but doom scrolling, endless short form video content into oblivion where we've just attentioned ourselves to death. And I think that that's a world in which I don't really want either. And if you're following the I just want to satisfy the customer standpoint, well, there's a dark side to that too. Because when you start acting like a rational human being and you start acting more like an addict, that's not, yes, you're giving them what they want, but it's not what they need, right? And
What was I talking about? It's like one of my favorite tweets I've ever seen, and it was recent. And someone's like, ideally, you'd have AI handle all your relationship building, intellectual pursuits, career stuff, and that will free you up to consume short form video content.
yeah,
I was like,
I
oh
know.
gosh,
The most dystopian. It is interesting. I was watching, I think it was Diary's CEO, and I can't remember who the guest was. He's done some TED Talks and kind of done motivational speaker stuff in the past. He's recently sort of getting into talking about AI. And he's talking about how like we're so results oriented that we're letting AI kind of like do the journey for us, but the journey is actually like the point. Right?
yeah.
That like writing, you can get AI to write a book for you, but like writing the book is what makes you the expert, right?
Yeah.
And so if you just let that do that, you missed out on the fact that you had to like, gut wrenching, hand wringing, self doubt. What is the story I'm trying to get to at the end of this? Like that transforms you as a person. And if you miss out on that, you're missing out on the point, right? And I think that these are interesting questions in which there's like, okay, well, I don't actually care about the journey on X, Y, and Z, but if my identity is tied to I create well architected software systems that are well reasoned about, I probably don't want AI to do all that for me, right?
Yeah.
I probably need to kind of be like, well, what is the problem we're solving? And because an AI tool is only capable of taking an aggregate of the output of what exists currently. And sometimes you need to solve problems that don't exist. Just like the Google folks, right? They needed to come up with novel and new ways of thinking about the world. And I don't know. I think we have to protect that, regardless of which route we go. We have to protect that so that we don't just doom scroll ourselves to death.
Well, this episode has been great for all of you who come to Book Overflow for our hard-hitting political analysis.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep. Well, we're excited to keep reading this book. This is going to be a 3-parter, just so that we can not kill ourselves trying to read through the whole thing. It's like 420 pages, and we try to set an upper limit of 150 a week. So we'll be back with the next couple chapters next week. But let's close out with our usual questions. We got what are we going to do differently in our career having read this book? What do you feel, Nathan?
I already, again, this is sort of one of these where I'm like, I know I should, but it's very inspiring to see how Google behaved around data-driven decisions. Every decision at Google, especially in the early days, you had to challenge a decision that was made without data. If you didn't have data to back up something, and so you could make grandiose and crazy ideas as long as you could back it up with data and keep moving things forward. And I think that's how they were able to kind of tread new territory with confidence. And so I want to hold myself to that standard. We're working on some weird ideas at the company that I'm working in right now, but in some areas we're kind of lazy about getting the data. We kind of vibe it, and I want to put an end to that. So that's what I'm going to hold myself to account. What about you?
Very nice. Yeah, I in general, I just want to be more ambitious with my engineering decisions. I think I would have kind of balked at the idea of crawling the entire internet. Like if I had that idea and then I said, oh, but we have to crawl the whole internet, I could see myself chickening out and being like, that'll never work. Let me try to come up with a different research paper. So yeah, I just I think it's valuable to, if you kind of can sit down and look at it and say like, no, this is the best way to do it, and this is a good, and the results will be worth it. Like, yeah, you should do what it takes to make your idea reality.
That reminds me, in the book, I think it was one of the founders. They were basically saying, hey, if I have this ambitious goal, even if I fail at it, along the way, I will have built some amazing stuff that didn't exist before, and that is a win, right? So like, you can't build things that change the world unless you're actually shooting for something that's like really out there. And I think it is.
Yeah.
You're like, it feels presumptuous sometimes. You're like, should I even take this on? That's
Yeah, it says he believed that the only true failure was not attempting the audacious. Even if you fail at your ambitious thing, it's very hard to fail completely, which I think is great. I've been working on my own little side project right now, and it's easy to kind of take a step back and be like, yeah, I don't know, is this a good idea? Is this even going to work or whatever? And I've kind of had to adopt that mindset and be like, hey, like even if it just totally flops, like you're still going to learn a lot from doing this.
Yep.
So yeah, that really resonated with me. Well, who would you recommend this book to? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. This is great. So yeah, I put folks that are both fascinated and horrified by the meteoric rise of Google. So it's an incredible book for context. If you're a super Google fanboy, you're going to get a lot out of this. If you're very skeptical and you think that Google's the wrong direction, you're still going to get a lot out of this. I'm a little bit of both of those opinions, and Steven Levy's awesome. So I would say any Steven Levy book, read it, and this is one of those, and you'll learn a lot.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I say anyone who loves kind of founding origin stories, especially this, these first couple chapters. Like I said, I love things like this. I'm reading Shoe Dog right now by Phil Knight. That's the founder of Nike, and kind of his biographical take on it. I loved Walt Disney, an American Original, which was that's the almost like the company sanctioned biography on Walt, or the family sanctioned biography on Walt Disney. I've heard there's another good one that isn't sanctioned by the family. I want to take a look at that one eventually. But yeah, I love these books that tell how a really big idea, especially anything that really changed. I'm an American, so American culture, but world culture as well. I find really interesting, like the genesis of an idea. So if you are like that too, give this book a look. And we're going to be reading for the next couple of weeks. So if you start now, you might be able to read along with us. But that wraps it up for this week. So thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find us on Twitter at Book Overflow Pod. You can contact us at contact at bookoverflow.io. You can find me on Twitter at Carter Morgan. And you can find Nathan his work with Functionally Imperative, his newsletter at functionallyimperative.com. We are excited to cover the next 2 weeks of this book, and we will see you then.
See ya.